Season 5, Episode 1. Worship. It feels like just yesterday we were penning down some remarkable moments in history, and now, in just a matter of months, so much has unfolded. These past few weeks have been quite eventful, to say the least. Although Christmas didn't turn out to be the most extraordinary one, it certainly left us with a unique experience. Now, where do we even begin to unravel the tales of this month? It's safe to say that we've all had our fair share of interesting moments. But let's focus on Annie for now, as her story seems to be the easiest to unravel. It's almost as if she's vanished into thin air. We've tried calling her multiple times and even sent a few texts, but no response. Either she's found herself in some sort of trouble with the law, or she's fallen head over heels in love once again. Who knows? As long as she's not back with Luke, I guess everything must be going well for her. Sometimes I can't help but wonder if she feels like the odd one out, considering she spends time with 3 individuals who possess godlike abilities. Wow, that sounded quite self-centered to me. Let's just forget I ever said that. When it comes to having godlike abilities, let's talk about Jason's incredible healing power. Despite being stabbed 6 weeks ago and unsure if he would come back to life, he has managed to make a remarkable recovery. Although he's still a bit sore and finding it difficult to walk, he's doing all right overall. To make things easier for him, we've assigned him the role of our designated driver. Jason's dad was so concerned about his well-being that he decided to get him a car, even if it's just a second-hand Peugeot. It may not be anything fancy, but it gets us where we need to go. Forget about buses or asking Zach for a ride. Jason has become our reliable driver now. Now, let's talk about our beloved Louise. She's still busy doing her thing and seems to be taking on the role of a mother hen. However, at the moment, she's not very happy. And I'll explain why in a moment. It's completely outside of her comfort zone, and I must say, it's also outside of mine. We found ourselves caught up in a rather complicated situation. Now, let's shift our focus away from the love of my life, Laura. I won't delve into the details about her, as it's irrelevant to this story. She plays no part in this James and Louise tale. I must emphasize that no animals were harmed in the creation of this chapter, although indirectly the cult was involved. Surprisingly, this cult decided to make an appearance in the most unexpected place. 4 years ago, Laura and I were battling the walking dead in Kingsteignton, and now we find ourselves returning to confront devil worshippers. It seems like the paranormal always finds its way into our lives. It all started back in college when we overheard some students in the canteen discussing the gruesome discovery of animal remains. Pieces of dogs and cats were being found, sometimes just heads or even the occasional paw. Laura was furious, her mouth wide open in disbelief. On the other hand, Louise didn't even flinch. She and I had encountered much stranger things before. She glanced over at Laura and me and casually remarked, "Gotta be devil worshippers." Laura stood up from her seat, her voice filled with determination as she suggested, or rather demanded, that we find out who was responsible for these pet killings. We continued to eavesdrop as we learned that the police were clueless and unable to identify the culprit. That night, myself, Laura, Louise, and Jason decided to take a drive to Kingsteignton. We had figured out that most of the animal parts were found within a 3-road radius, indicating that the killer didn't venture far from home. It became a game of hope and observation. For nearly a week, we would drive up and park, scanning the area for anything out of the ordinary. One late evening, as we sat in a dimly lit car park, enjoying our milkshakes and food, our attention was drawn to 3 figures dressed in black robes walking down the road. Louise accidentally spilled her milkshake, her eyes fixated on the mysterious trio. Without a word, the rest of us knew she was onto something. Louise swallowed hard, her gaze never leaving the suspects. "Those are our cat killers," she muttered under her breath. Laura leaned in closer, making a face at the strange smell emanating from Louise's drink. It was clear that it wasn't just a milkshake. Louise shot her an angry look, causing Laura to quickly move away. Together we watched as the robed figures stopped, their attention captured by a small ginger cat. They began to stroke the friendly feline, unaware that they were being watched. After a short while, the trio started looking around. Laura screamed in horror as one of them pulled out a knife from their pocket. "Oh my God! They're going to kill it!" Without hesitation, Laura and Louise leaped out of the car, with Jason honking the horn to alert the animal killers that they had been caught. The attention of the three figures turned towards us as Laura and Louise hurried over. They dropped the cat and sprinted off down an alleyway. We, along with Laura and Louise, gave chase, but they were already far ahead. Louise took the lead, darting across the road, narrowly avoiding being hit by a car in her pursuit. We heard Louise's urgent command to get back to the car and have Jason drive around in case we needed to catch up with them. Laura and I sprinted back, yelling at Jason to start the car as we hopped back in. Jason quickly reversed, accidentally bumping into the parked car next to us. He then swung the car around the corner, just catching a glimpse of Louise disappearing down a distant street. Jason began to panic, shouting, "Oh no! What if we crash?" Laura, in turn, screamed, "Are we going to die?" I snapped back, "Calm down, we're only going 20 miles per hour." It was clear that Jason wasn't as skilled a driver as our friends Zach or Marie, but he was giving it his best shot. As we turned another corner in the direction Louise had been running, she suddenly emerged from around a corner. We all screamed as Jason slammed on the brakes, narrowly avoiding hitting her. In the process, the drink Louise had been holding flew backwards, drenching Laura in milkshake. Laura exclaimed, "Now I smell like a drunkard." Louise jumped back into the front seat, exclaiming, "I lost them, they're like ghosts." Louise proposed taking a drive up a road, while Jason decided to explore another corner. In the meantime, Laura exclaimed, "I reek of vodka." Louise glanced over and noticed that Laura's milkshake had spilled all over her hoodie. Jason parked the car, and Louise eagerly hopped out, her focus now on the houses. She stepped out and began peering over the fences, in case the culprits had sought refuge in a nearby garden. Louise pondered how they could have managed to escape. It was a rare occurrence for someone to outrun her, given her incredible speed. She contemplated the situation, concerned that one day they might escalate to harming people if they were capable of killing innocent animals. Laura, still irritated by being covered in vodka and ice cream, shot me an angry glare as she exited the car. I followed closely behind, assisting the girls in their search for the mysterious individuals in robes. As we continued our search, we suddenly heard a piercing whistle, followed by Louise's excited shout, "Jackpot!" Laura and I hurried over to see Louise standing in front of a house with no lights on, but music emanating from within. Louise knocked on the door, patiently waiting for someone to answer. The music abruptly ceased as she knocked for a second time. The three of us stood still, observing for any signs of activity. After what felt like an eternity, Louise's attention was then captured by the laundry hanging on the line. All of the garments were pitch black, including a wetsuit and a towel adorned with a pentagram. Louise scrutinized James and Laura while she sniffed the towel, leaving them perplexed as to her actions. She glanced at them, a smile playing on her lips, and asked, "Do you know what removes bloodstains from clothes?" I already knew the answer and ventured a guess. "Let me guess. You can smell bleach on that towel?" Louise nodded, confirming that it had indeed been bleached. We all turned our attention to the house known as Number 7, which now stood eerily quiet, devoid of any music. Yet, we couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Louise shrugged her shoulders and suggested we return to the car, as there seemed to be nothing else we could do. As we made our way back to Jason, there was a strange tension in the air, and I overheard Louise muttering to herself about trouble, though her words were too faint to comprehend. Laura shot me another angry look, indicating that I had once again done something to upset her. Calmly, I requested, "Can you tell me what I've done wrong this time, Laura?" She remained silent and continued walking. Louise glanced at me, rolling her eyes and offering a reassuring smile, assuring me that it wasn't my fault and not to take it personally. We climbed into the car, and an uncomfortable silence enveloped us as we merged onto the motorway. Suddenly, Jason broke the silence, asking, "How is my driving?" We all took a moment to agree that his driving was fine and that he had nothing to worry about. However, I couldn't help but question how he had even passed his driving test, as his lack of confidence was evident. Jason then inquired if everyone was all right, prompting Laura to shout out, "You see, when you have a boyfriend and you're in a dangerous situation, he should hold your hand, but he never does." Louise rolled her eyes and instructed Jason to fetch some tablets, as she felt a headache coming on. I directly addressed Laura, stating that if anyone was in danger, it would have been Louise, as we were safe inside the car. Laura didn't respond, and instead began to complain about how I needed to find a job. In response, I retorted, "I need to get a job. Have you ever worked one?" Laura stared at me with a demonic glare. "I need to find a job, considering my mental health and the thoughts I've been having." Louise and Jason listened silently as the argument unfolded. When Laura suggested buying knives or a rope, Louise couldn't stay quiet any longer. She yelled at both of us, telling us to stop acting like brats. Laura and I fell silent, realizing that this argument was just another one in a long line of many. Our relationship and friendship were hanging by a thread. To make matters worse, Laura wanted to get married and expected me to make money to fulfill her dreams. She would often try on wedding dresses and make comments about how amazing they would look on her if only we could afford them. She would also use the incident at the waiter job last year as a way to make me feel guilty. After a long and quiet drive, we arrived in Torquay and returned to our flat. I thanked Louise and Jason for the evening and apologized for the argument. Laura got out of the car first and thanked Jason and Louise with a smile. Suddenly, Louise stopped me from leaving the car and suggested that Laura and I spend some time apart for the evening and catch up tomorrow. Laura heard this and gave a smug smile, knowing that a passive-aggressive remark was coming. She replied, "Well, I hope I can respond to your text later. Maybe I'll practice tying knots and see if I can still breathe." Louise immediately turned her attention to Laura and shouted, expressing her disapproval of Laura's hinting at something that would make me worry. Laura responded by saying, "At least I'm not scared of having sex or catching something, Louise." Louise looked at her and replied directly, "At least I can satisfy myself with one man and not use it just happened as an excuse to avoid taking responsibility." Laura smiled and said, "Well, I'm going to bed. Hopefully I won't feel like sticking around." Louise remained composed as Laura bid her farewell and suggested that Jason and she hang out at some point. I could sense that the mention of hanging was directed towards me. Jason didn't say anything, but he put on a smile and said goodbye to Laura. I observed as Laura made her way back to the apartment, while Jason, Louise, and I drove back to Louise's place. As we traveled down the road, Louise suddenly lost her composure and shouted at both of us. "Can you believe that Laura thinks I'm a virgin, mate?" she exclaimed. I pondered on that thought and realized that I had never seen Louise engage in anything risque. It seemed like she was quite conservative in certain aspects, almost like a nun. Finally, we arrived back at Louise's flat after a short trip. All three of us were exhausted, and Louise was clearly irritated by Laura's comment. Once inside the flat, Louise's nurturing instincts kicked in as she grabbed some pillows and a blanket for me to sleep on the sofa. This had become a regular occurrence, where I sought refuge at Louise's place to escape from Laura. Jason, as always, asked about his driving skills and if he did all right. Both Louise and I shouted in unison, "Your driving was fine!" It was almost midnight, and I noticed that Louise had discreetly picked up a bottle of beer, aware that I was watching her as she tucked it into her dressing gown. She smiled and reassured me, saying, "Don't worry, it's just one beer, and it's not even that strong." Jason and Louise then retreated to Louise's bedroom, while I switched off the lights and reflected on how the day had unfolded. I had no luck in apprehending those troublemakers, and I knew that Laura's mental health issues would likely blow over by morning, as they always did. However, a lingering doubt kept me awake. What if this time she actually did something and no one was there to help her? I had witnessed Laura at her lowest points and knew that she was capable of anything if things became too overwhelming for her. Another thing that troubled me was how Laura would get upset if I didn't spend enough time with her. We had a heated argument, and she expressed her desire to get married and have children. However, I couldn't help but question whether it was wise to bring kids into such a toxic relationship. The thought of how social services would perceive her mental health added another layer of complexity to the situation. Yet, deep down, I wondered if taking the next step could actually resolve our issues. Maybe I was moving too slowly, and she was growing impatient with the lack of progress in our relationship. As I drifted off to sleep, I hoped that things would be better tomorrow, unaware of the damage Laura had caused that night and the conversation unfolding in Louise's bedroom. Louise lay awake, reflecting on the hurtful argument with Laura. Suddenly, Jason's voice broke the silence, suggesting that Laura might be right about their lack of sexual intimacy despite being together for a while. Louise felt a surge of nervousness and took a deep breath before responding. She confessed her lack of confidence in being sexy and admitted that even hugging made her anxious, making the idea of sex even more daunting. Jason paused, questioning the status of their relationship, which caught Louise off guard. She reassured him, exclaiming, "Of course we are." Jason smiled in response, choosing not to say anything further. Louise couldn't help but wonder why he had doubted their relationship and asked him directly. Jason explained that they never hugged, and Laura had found it peculiar. Louise suppressed her anger, knowing that Laura had been meddling, and replied to Jason. She playfully mentioned a future outing to Dartmoor, where she would tie Laura to a tree for a dog walker to find. Jason reassured Louise of his love and expressed his willingness to wait until she was ready to take the next step. Nevertheless, Laura's remarks had left Louise deep in thought. She remained on her bed in the darkness, sipping on the beer she had taken from the lounge earlier. As the night slowly transitioned into day, the warm sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, rousing Louise from her slumber. She had spent most of the night tossing and turning, unable to fully sleep due to her annoyance over everything that had been said to her. Stretching, she glanced around and noticed that Jason was still fast asleep. For a moment, she contemplated embracing him, but quickly dismissed the idea. Instead, she decided to seek advice from James and headed towards the lounge. However, upon entering, she realized that James had already left and returned home. Glancing at the time, she realized it was already 10 o'clock in the morning. Louise took a moment to relax and once again pondered her relationship with Jason. She understood why he was hesitant, as he was genuinely caring. She knew she had to take action to resolve the stagnation in their relationship, even considering a trip to Jackson Stacy's The Kinky Sex Shop. However, she couldn't go alone, ruling out Annie as an option, since no one had seen or heard from her in ages. Going with Laura was out of the question after her rude words the other night, and James wouldn't be suitable either, as they might be mistaken for a couple. Just as she was contemplating her options, Louise's phone rang. She quickly retrieved it from her dressing gown pocket and answered to find James on the other end. "All right, mate. You could have at least said goodbye before you left," she remarked. James explained that Laura had disappeared without a trace and wasn't responding to his texts. Worried, Louise's concern shifted from Laura to James, and she immediately changed her plans, assuring him that she would come to see him right away. This stroll felt a bit unusual, even though she couldn't remember how many times she had done it before. Louise carefully observed all the clothing and makeup marketing signs. It was something that never really caught her interest. She thought, "If I wear makeup, people will think I'm hiding something, and besides, I'm more of an Aussie tomboy than a girly girl." As she made her way up the busy street, her eyes landed on Jack's and Stacy's shop a few yards ahead. It was the one place she wanted to visit but hesitated to enter alone. It was rare for Louise to feel out of her comfort zone, but this was one of those moments. Just hearing about the things Laura did with James was enough to make her nervous. Taking a deep breath as she approached, she scanned the area to see if anyone was watching. Her gaze was immediately drawn to a beautiful bra and pair of thongs on sale. It felt different to her, used to wearing a t-shirt and shorts to bed. Stepping inside Jack's and Stacy's, Louise felt a sense of relief as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. Her eyes wandered around the shop, taking in everything. She couldn't help but notice the provocative lingerie and wondered how people could wear such things without feeling self-conscious. Glancing at the magazines displaying photos of naked women, she felt her anxiety rise once more. As another woman smiled at her, Louise chose to ignore the gesture and focused on finding her underwear size quickly. Unfortunately, she couldn't find it on the clearance rack. Perhaps they didn't carry her size, or maybe she was below the standard size range. After a thorough search, she realized they didn't have her size available. She had no other option but to resort to the most unfavorable scenario. She would have to approach a staff member and explain herself. How could she possibly find the words to tell someone that she was buying sexy underwear for the first time? Louise reluctantly called out to the staff from the back of the store. However, before she could do so, her attention was drawn to the bell placed next to the cash register. With her head down, Louise hurriedly pressed the bell. The wait for a staff member felt agonizingly long for her. What if she was asked for identification and turned away because of her nervousness? Just as she was contemplating these thoughts, someone called out to her, asking her to wait. Louise glanced around the shop and noticed the other customer who had previously smiled at her. She locked eyes with the customer, who once again smiled at her. The customer approached Louise and spoke to her. "I can tell this is your first time in a shop like this," they said. Louise smiled and nodded in response. She explained that a few years ago, she had come to the shop to spice up her life with her girlfriend, and now it felt natural to her. Unsure of what else to say, Louise simply said, "Thank you." Just then, a woman emerged from the back, and Louise recognized her immediately. It was Annie, of all people. It had to be someone she knew, and to make matters worse, it had to be Annie. Annie looked surprised to see her and smiled. Confused, she looked around the shop and said, "I thought Laura would have come in with you." Louise was on the verge of hyperventilating, unable to handle any more stress. She stumbled backward, but Annie quickly caught her before she hit the floor. Without saying a word, Annie rubbed her hand in an attempt to calm her down and guided her to a chair next to the cash register. Louise couldn't help but laugh, realizing how foolish she had been to come into a shop like this. Annie flashed a smile and mentioned, "I have a feeling you're not here for Laura." Louise grinned back and replied, "You could say that. I'm actually trying to take things to the next level with Jason." Annie inquired if Louise was concerned about others' opinions and reassured her not to pay attention to such people. Louise beamed and asked, "Do you happen to have that outfit on the mannequin in a 34D? Annie smiled and said she would check. Louise took a deep breath, relaxing as she glanced around the shop. Suddenly her heart sank as she spotted Laura wearing one of her typical expressions, eyeing the same outfit. Louise didn't want to be caught, so she hid. Just then, Laura called out for Annie, needing assistance. Annie returned with the outfit Louise liked, noticing her hiding. She greeted Laura, who urgently requested a ballroom-style mask. Annie regretfully informed her they were not in stock. Laura left, unaware of Louise's presence. Annie assured Louise it was safe to come out, presenting her with the outfit in her size. Louise, tired of the drama, wanted to leave. She asked why the gang hadn't heard from Annie. Annie explained she changed her number due to unwanted calls. She then complimented Louise, saying she would look stunning in the lingerie, even though she was already beautiful. Louise, uncertain about how to interpret the comment, flashed a smile at Annie. While Louise was paying for the clothes, Annie called out to her, saying, "Don't be a stranger. You know where to find me. Catch up with you guys soon." Louise shouted back, "Cheers, mate," and gave her a thumbs up. As Louise exited the shop, Annie had her own inner struggles, but it wasn't the right time or place to discuss them. Louise hurried up the road after the shopping ordeal, reassured that Laura was safe. She decided to still go and meet James. Meanwhile, James was at home, unaware of Laura's safety, even though she hadn't been answering his calls or texts. James sat there, hoping she was okay, knowing that her habit of ghosting him and then returning was all too familiar. He pondered deeply about their relationship, realizing that it was slowly coming to an end. 4 years was a long time, but he needed to face the reality. They were growing apart and spending less time together. With everything that had transpired, maybe he didn't deserve her, and she needed someone who could truly love her. After a while, there was a knock at the door, and James hoped it was Laura returning. He rushed to the door and was greeted by Louise, who smiled and reassured him that Laura was fine and that she had seen her in town. A wave of relief washed over James, knowing that Laura was safe and unharmed. Louise joked, "Are you going to let me in, or do I have to wait out here?" James apologized and let her in, noticing the beer she had brought. Louise looked at him and quipped, "Don't worry, it's been a long day. I needed a beer to unwind." James didn't question it, but couldn't help but think that it was at least the third one she had had in half a day. James knew it all began last month when Louise and Laura found themselves in that terrifying situation with the creature they dubbed the Terrors. Since then, Louise had been feeling the effects of that encounter, almost as if she was dealing with some sort of trauma. James was a bit irritated when he told Laura not to give Louise a hard time, reminding her that Louise had seen enough in her lifetime. But why was James happy? He realized it was the influence of the drink, as Louise seemed to have gained a newfound confidence. She had started smiling more, and it was a refreshing change. When Louise asked to use the restroom, James simply reminded her to put the seat back down. Louise chuckled, and James couldn't help but feel pleased to see her genuinely happy and carefree for once, instead of lost in her thoughts. As he relaxed, knowing Laura was safe, his phone rang. It was Jason calling. "What's up, buddy?" James answered. Jason was bursting with excitement, exclaiming that he had some juicy information. After calming Jason down, James learned that a friend had informed him about a cult holding a party at the same house they had been investigating. This was the crew's golden opportunity to strike at the heart of this eerie movement. James mentioned that Louise was at his place and suggested Jason come over so they could all plan together. Jason agreed and said he was on his way. As James waited for him, he heard Louise call out to him, holding a beer and asking for his opinion on her outfit from Jack's and Stacy's. James was taken aback by how stunning she looked in it, and it suited her perfectly. Louise was thrilled by his compliment and mentioned she would wear it again in the future.